Good morning. Today, on Lesson 3, we are going to be looking at the historical background before the arrival of Jesus. Last week, we touched upon the body of rabbinic literature and how the New Testament quotes the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, and that there were 4 categories of Jewish quotation of the Scriptures. Also, there are 4 categories of Old Testament messianic prophecies, and I listed those for you. Today, we're going to discuss the historical background before the arrival of Jesus. Many empires arose and thrived on the face of the earth, but only 4 had a particular influence on God's chosen people, the Jews. They had a great impact on Israel, and those are Assyria, the first dispersion of the Jews was to Assyria, second Babylon, Persia or Medo-Persia, it's also known as Medo-Persia, and Rome. After Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel was divided, remember, in the north with its capital city of Samaria, where was the kingdom of Israel, and the capital was Samaria. In the south, and 10 tribes went north. I can't remember the name. It was Rehoboam and Jeroboam. One was north and one was south. One was Solomon's son. But in the south was Judah, the nation, they called it the nation of Judah, with its capital in Jerusalem. I just want to mention that the 10 northern tribes, people say, are lost tribes. But that isn't true because before the arrival of the Assyrian Empire and that they conquered the northern 10 tribes and took them out into captivity, many Jews from all tribes migrated south because of the unholy altar that they had raised up, Rehoboam, I believe, and all the people didn't want idolatry. People who wanted to worship the one true God migrated south. They left of all tribes. So, and one of the proofs of that is that when Jesus was presented at the temple, 40 days, I believe it was 40 days after he was born, your firstborn son you present to the Lord. Your firstborn that opens your womb, who is a son. And that was Jesus for Mary. And so Anna, the prophetess, was from one of, for instance, the 10 northern tribes, because it happens to mention her tribe. Okay, so we're going to go on now. The first invasion of Israel occurred in 721 BC. The northern kingdom fell into the Assyrian Empire. The Israelites were taken into captivity, and then Assyrians brought into Gentiles into the territory of northern of Israel, the kingdom of Israel that they just conquered, because they believed that they wanted to dilute Israel's customs and religious culture and all that. They wanted to infiltrate that and change that for the worst. So they planted many Gentiles in the northern territory of Israel after they conquered it. Now, Judah in the south experienced a series of invasions, and finally they fell to the Babylonian Empire in 586 BC, and they went into captivity for 70 years, from 586 BC to 516 BC. Now, during that period of time, the Edomites, descendants of Esau, were pushed out of the neighboring land of Edom, and they settled into what was previously known as southern Judah. The area southern Judah came to be called Idumea, which is the Greek version of Edom, Edomite. Then later on, the Third Empire, Medo-Persia, conquered Babylon in 536 BC, and the whole land of Israel fell under their sovereignty. The Persians renamed some parts of the land, though most of the new designations were simply a continuation of the old Assyrian names. So the conqueror would go in, they would change the names of cities and towns. But as far as the Medo-Persians, they didn't do a lot of name changing. But then after the Medo-Persian Empire comes the Greek Empire, also known as Hellenistic. They arrived at 333. They ruled, and they began to 333 BC to 63 BC. They began to influence Israel, and they established many new towns, usually on the coastal plains of Israel. And they converted them into Greek-speaking cities. And that remained so into the New Testament period. So there was a lot of influence of Greek language and customs and all that. But not really a lot where Jerusalem, that stayed purely Jewish and didn't get affected, at least at the time of Jesus. Upon Alexander's death, he divided his kingdom into four. There were four generals. I'm not going to mention all four, but the two that affected Israel were the general that took over Egypt and the general that took over Syria to the north. So Egypt to the south of Israel and Syria to the north of Israel. And until 198 BC, Israel remained under the Ptolemies of Egypt, who did not disturb the Jewish way of customs and way of worship or forcefully Hellenize the people. However, in 198 BC, the Syrians conquered Egypt, and Israel fell under the Seleucids of Syria, who practiced a very aggressive form of Hellenization. And the most extreme Syrian monarch was Antiochus IV Epimanes, who ruled from 215 BC to 164 BC, whose activities against the Jews and Jerusalem led to the Maccabean revolt in 168 BC. That revolt was led by Mattathias. He was a Hasmonean. So they look at Hasmonean. Well, what is Hasmonean? It's a ruling dynasty of Judea. He was a Jewish priest as well, from the village of Modin, Modiin. When he died shortly after the beginning of the revolt, his son Judah Maccabee took over the leadership. And he ruled from 168 to 160 when he died in battle. Now his brother followed in his footsteps. He was Jonathan Maccabee. He ruled from 160 to 142 BC. He was killed by subterfuge. Finally, Simon Maccabee, which was another brother, took over in 142 BC to 134 BC. So all of the brothers, I think there were a total of 5 brothers, did not die of natural causes. They either were killed in battle or by subterfuge treachery. Simon was poisoned by his son-in-law. After the death of the Maccabee brothers, all the following rulers of the Hasmonean kingdom, they called it, were descendants of Simon. There was John Hyrcanus. He ruled from 134 to 104 BC. Aristobulus the first, he ruled from 104 to 103 BC, just 1 year. There's Alexander Jannaeus. He ruled from 103 BC to 76 BC. And Alexander's wife, her name was Alexandra, the wife of Yannai, from 76 BC to 67 BC. With Alexandra, her death, she failed to appoint one of her 2 sons to succeed her, so there was a civil war broke out between her 2 sons. Hyrcanus II versus Aristobulus V, and that led to an intervention by Rome. The 2 sides asked Rome to support them, and in the year 63 BC, General Pompey, the Roman general, incorporated Israel into the Roman Empire. The very thing that the Maccabees rebelled against returned to them at that point. One thing to mention, the Hasmonean kingdom, one of the practices that some of its rulers, not all of the rulers, a practice that they did was they forced certain conquered Gentile people to convert to Judaism by the sword, forcefully. Among these were Idumeans. Remember, Idumeans, they were in southern Judah at the time. They had moved from Edom. And the Idumeans, descendants of Esau. So in 47 BC, we're getting to the point of about the time of Jesus, Julius Caesar appointed one of the Idumeans, a man called Antipater, to be governor of Judea. And he appointed Antipater's son, a man who would become Herod the Great, to be ruler in Galilee. Antipater was assassinated in 43 BC, and Hyrcanus II took control of the nation of Judea. So, now during the time of, in 40 BC, during the time of Hyrcanus II, the Parthians invaded the land. And a nephew of Hyrcanus II, named Antigonus II Mattathias, led the invasion. But Hyrcanus was deposed and banished to Babylon. He left. Herod's brother, I didn't know he had a brother, but he does, Paschal, Phasael, was killed by the Parthians, but Herod was able to flee to Rome, where Roman Senate under Anthony and Cleopatra appointed Herod king of Judea and provided him with a Roman legion to reconquer the land. So during the period of 40 BC to 37 BC, Herod reconquered the land and ruled as king under Roman authority. He ruled from 37 BC to 4 BC. Guess what? Herod the Great had 10 wives altogether. His favorite wife was Mariamne, Mariamne, the daughter of Hyrcanus, and thus a blood relative of the Maccabean or Hasmonean house. So within the context of the New Testament, the two rulers that were important, besides Herod, was Pontius Pilate and Herod Agrippa, also known as King Agrippa I. King Agrippa was the grandson of Herod the Great, and Mariamne was his grandmother, which meant he was of the household of Herod, and also of the house of the Hasmonean Maccabees through his grandmother. This made Agrippa more acceptable to the Jewish community than the Roman prefects and procurators. He was the Herod Agrippa of Acts 12, where he decapitated James, the brother of Jesus. The predecessor of Agrippa was Pontius Pilate, which was one of the two longest ruling. He was a Roman procurator in the land, and he played a major role in the trial and death of Jesus. So let's talk a little bit more about Herod the Great. Herod the Great was born into a rich and influential family of Idumeans. Herod the Great's father was Antipater II, who became known as Herod Antipater the Idumean. While Antipater's name is not mentioned in the scriptures, 10 of his descendants play a major role in the gospel narratives. Antipater, Herod's father, formally converted to Judaism and followed a lot of the religious practices demanded by the Mosaic law. So did Herod, but not super strict. Herod, in obedience to the commandment about graven images, he forbade that an image be put on the coins issued during his reign. He also didn't eat pork. Antipater, he did follow the dietary rules of the Mosaic law. He made sure that the women in the family did not marry uncircumcised men. Antipater's children, including Herod, were educated according to the Greek philosophies, teachings of the Greeks. The Olympic Games, which were offensive to Jews, were organized. And some of the marriages in the family of Herod were very close relatives. And that also mirrored what the Romans did. After the Parthian Wars, Herod came into power. He was installed by Rome as Rex Scosicu et Amicus, king, ally, and friend. Herod was one of these independent kings, sometimes referred to as client kings. They were indigenous elites who were willing to cooperate with the colonial power. They would not set up a dynasty of their own, but when the king died, it was Rome who would decide who would succeed him. Rome's underlying philosophy could be summarized as fides, F-I-D-E-S, meaning Latin for trust. Although, in Herod's case, ambition might be the more honest description of those who willingly became client kings. In return for the favor, Rome was willing to extend to its vassals soldiers anytime they would be needed, anywhere in the empire, because borders had to be secured, taxes had to be paid. Although Herod submitted to all requirements of Rome, he seemed to have enjoyed a large freedom to reign at will. And Herod may not have had to pay tribute to the Romans, and he amassed great wealth during his lifetime. He was able to extend his boundaries, build up military strength, establish a ring of defensive buffer colonies, create defensive fortresses in Jerusalem and throughout his realm, and established an extensive network of spies. He started magnificent building projects inside and outside Israel. One story about Herod is that before he came into power in 37 BC, there was an infamous robber chief, so a gang of robbers, and the chief was named Hezekiah, and who terrorized the Jews of Galilee. Hyrcanus, the previous ethnarch of the day, seemed too weak to stop this criminal gang, but not so Herod. In fact, the young Herod at that time took matters into his own hands. He captures Hezekiah and executes him. Herod was very vicious with the way he killed the enemy. And the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders, they were taken aback by Herod's viciousness. And they demanded Hyrcanus bring Herod before the Sanhedrin, to the tribunal, so that they wanted to put him on trial for his flagrant overstepping of his authority. But Herod knew how to intimidate the assembly there. He responded to the summons, not in mourning or with a contrite heart, but with decked in purple and attended by a bodyguard. He knew he had the protection of Sextus Caesar, who was the governor of Syria at that time, who demanded that Hyrcanus make certain Herod was acquitted. And the ethnarch obeyed. And he recommended that Herod leave the city secretively. However, Herod did not stay in hiding for long, but returned to Jerusalem with an army seeking vengeance against those who had opposed him. Only his father's pleadings and coercion prevented a major bloodbath, and Herod returned to Galilee, quote, comforting himself with the reflection that he had at least given an exhibition of his power and put a wholesome terror upon his opponents. When Herod came to power, he ruled the kingdom under the auspices of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. But after their defeat in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, he turned to his former patron's enemy, Caesar Augustus, for support, and Herod controlled the entire central region. He received the blessing of Caesar Augustus, and he went to Caesar Augustus. He said, "Sir, I'm going to be loyal to you just as I was to Antony and Cleopatra." So then he controlled the entire central section of the country. Okay, now, especially in the latter years of his reign, but all throughout his reign, the Jews were to suffer grievous oppression under Herod's rule for almost 4 decades. And in the latter years, Herod became very paranoid, always fearful. Someone was conspiring to take away his throne. he ordered the assassination of his favorite wife and 3 of his own sons. Caesar Augustus said, he said, it is safer to be Herod's pig than to be Herod's son. Again, it was the reason, his viciousness, his paranoia, that he ordered the slaughter of the babes of Bethlehem, as well as many other innocent civilians. As he was approaching his death, his final heinous act was, in order to ensure that there would be a time of national mourning upon his death, he ordered that many of the affluent and respected citizens from every village in the land were held. They were apprehended, held in what they called the hippodrome, and at his death, he ordered that they were all to be murdered and executed, so that, my goodness, then he said, he thought to himself, well, they're going to be mourning. Not necessarily for me, but that didn't matter. There would be a national period of mourning at my death. So, but at his death, these dignitaries were to be executed, right? And this would be his one final heinous and vindictive act. Well, it didn't happen, because his sister Salome overruled his orders, and the notable people were released. As much as the rabbis hated Herod, they did appreciate his building the temple. So he remodeled or refurbished and grandized the second temple, the temple of Hezekiah. And they had a saying, he who has not seen the temple of Herod has never seen a beautiful building. Upon his death, Herod's kingdom was divided among some of his sons. Archelaus took over in Judea and Samaria, and Archelaus, plays a role in the early babyhood of Jesus. Antipas ruled in Galilee and Perea. He played a role in the trial of Jesus. Philip ruled in the northeast Golan all the way to Panias and other regions. Philip is mentioned but does not play a direct role in Jesus' life. While the Jewish people believed Jerusalem to be their capital, the Romans made Caesarea the capital of the land. And again, they found that Hellenization, or, Greek influence was not in Judea and Samaria, also, and Idumea also remained unaffected by Hellenization. At the time, if they look at archaeological finds, it appears that they did not reach, Hellenization did not reach the region until 2nd century BC. Upper Galilee is almost devoid of Greek epigraphic remains from the 1st and 2nd century. Lower Galilee proved to have been influenced to a greater degree by the Greek-speaking world. And Lower Galilee is where Jesus grew up in Nazareth. And it was in Lower Galilee that Jesus spent the majority of his ministry years. Okay. think we're going to stop right here and continue very soon with the next lesson. Thank you and God bless you. Have a great day.